Chapter 5 review, y'all. Okay, you should know what OSHA does. You should know what the EPA does. You should know what the FDA does. All three of these agencies have their own place, their own unique duties and responsibilities. So example, what does OSHA do? O stands for occupational. That means you, the healthcare worker. You should also know what EPA is responsible for. E stands for environment. What is the environment? Air, water, land, and even the environment indoors can be part of the environment. So you should know how the EPA requires labeling for pesticides. One pesticide type is disinfectants used in sterile processing. These have to be registered with the EPA registration number. If you look on a bottle of disinfectant, you'll see it has an EPA registration number. You should know why we have regulations and standards in healthcare. Do we want it to be like the wild, wild west, or do we want it to be safe for the patient? Do we want to have some minimal levels of quality and safety? You should know that the FDA classifies medical devices by risk category. So risk level 1 is the low risk, risk level 2 is moderate, and risk level 3 is the highest risk. You should be able to give examples of what are in these risk categories. You should know, for example, that a heart valve is not a low risk. If it should fail to work, who's going to die? Somebody. If the heart valve fails to work, it puts a patient's life in jeopardy, and they could possibly die. So that is a high risk. These risk categories are categories 1, 2, and 3. Don't forget, this flips when you're starting to talk about a recall. So where a heart valve would be a level or a class 3 risk, the device itself in a recall is going to be a class 1 recall. You should understand the FDA's requirements for for reporting devices that malfunction, unharm patients or kill patients. You should understand who's responsible for reporting to who. So example, we did this yesterday. I think Gabby was responsible for reporting to Kia. Okay. So if I know that a device harmed one of my patients in the hospital, and I know what went wrong, I know it was a device, I had to report it to the manufacturer and to the FDA. Manufacturer then in turn has to report it to the FDA. The FDA gets a double whammy. You should know that medical device reporting is regulated by one of these government agencies. You should know why the Department of Transportation has regulations. Do they have regulations regarding the transportation of sterile equipment? Why would they? That the Department of Transportation's regulations regarding or that affect a hospital are really about transporting biological hazards or radioactivity hazards. You should know that you cannot have a law looser than the federal law, and you cannot have a law being applied that is looser than another law. So for example, if the federal government says drop and give me 20, and the state government says drop and give me 50, you're going to drop and do 50. Even though the state government is not as big and powerful as the federal government, the more stringent law applies. Do you understand the bloodborne pathogen standard? It is about protecting you, protecting other people, protecting the public, which means that the PPE, the personal protective equipment that is required by OSHA, is not an option. It's not, you're going to say, well, I know I'm supposed to wear it, but it's really hot in here, or the mask makes it hard for me to breathe, or whatever. It's literally the law that you wear that PPE. What is a third-party reprocessor? You should know what a third-party reprocessor does. They can take something that is used and return it to new condition, make it safe for the patient again. So if the FDA regulates manufacturers, who regulates third-party reprocessors? You should know what AMI is about. AAMI. They are a standards organization. They're a voluntary organization that creates voluntary standards that hospitals want to live up to, want to abide by. Because if we don't live up to these standards, then we are rejecting the industry experts' science and their input. So of course we're going to want to live up to these standards. As a matter of fact, the Joint Commission, another voluntary consensus organization, has enough power that they can come into your hospital and determine that you're not living up to AMI standards, and they can get you unaccredited, which means you are no longer going to be able to get reimbursed by the federal government for patient care provided. You should know what the Sgna does. It's not a government body. It is one of those organizations like AAMI, Sgna, AORN, APIC, ISO, ANSI. Those are all .orgs. So the Sgna is one that deals with endoscopy, gastroenterology. Okay, so gastroenterology endoscopy. You should know that this picture of the Wild West behind me represents pre-1990, when the reuse of single-use devices was less regulated. Patient care and our processes and our standards and our guidelines, the regulations from the federal agencies, they're all becoming harder, more strict. We're not just going to loosen regulations and say, oh yeah, let's go back to the Old West and everybody can do just whatever they feel like doing to save money. That is, no. Patient care always has to be getting better. And you should know if a recall is initiated, it could be initiated by a manufacturer. It could be initiated by the Food and Drug Administration. It may be mandatory or it may be voluntary. You should know about MedWatch. MedWatch is a voluntary reporting program that the FDA has instituted. So it's not the same as the Safe Medical Devices Act, but the Safe Medical Devices Act means that the hospital or the healthcare facility must notify the FDA and must notify the manufacturer if a device harms or worse a patient. The MedWatch program is for suspected device problems that they don't necessarily have to have harmed a patient, but it is believed that they could have been part of an event that harmed a patient, or if that they just could harm a patient the way they're designed and recommended to be used, then that's something that can be voluntarily reported to the MedWatch, and that's the FDA who administers that program. And I thank you for watching this. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.